Hi folks, it's Amanda here. Quite the weekend we had up here in Ottawa. I gotta tell you, we've never had a tornado in the almost 20 years that I've lived here, and this weekend we had what they're saying is six. So just to say that I was very safe. The only thing that I experienced was a significant power outage from Friday night to Sunday evening. But I am happy to bring this presentation to you a little late, but here nonetheless. So this is about the intersectionality and analysis portion of our class and articles. So I'm bringing to you my major takes from the articles, themes that came through, as well as looking at substance use disorders through this idea of interlocking systems. I really do like that term. I think that it brought out a completely different way for me to look at intersectionality. I start the quote off by Demoon, though I'm not going to talk about Demoon quite yet. But if I had to sum up, if I had to boil down all three articles into a quote, this would, I feel, represent all three really well. And so the intersectional type paradigm can expand and deepen the set of tools available to deconstruct the work of power. And that is what intersectionality is about. It's about making the invisible visible, um, and seeing how power works. So that stood out for me as kind of the common the common gist, I guess, of all three. So we're going to start off actually talking about speaking into the void, the May article. So this image is from the movie Inception. So the dream within a dream within a dream, and I thought what I took from this article was a really cool um, kind of observations of how is intersectionality being critiqued, and then critiquing those critiques. And so we've talked about critiques is not about being critical. It's just holding something up to the light, I believe. Being able to see it and examine it and respect it, like respect it enough to look at it. And so what May has done is she's actually taken a look at what are the critiques of intersectionality. And what she ends up gathering is how the critiques actually can be viewed through an intersectionality lens, bringing a whole other depth to who's critiquing, um, who is not being represented, what are the messages that we're getting or not getting, actually. And so May is very clear that intersectionality was founded with Black feminist thinkers, and that this has been deemed invisible. It's been unacknowledged, it's been ignored. And so intersectionality kind of right off the hop, so like I keep getting this image of like um not that it eats itself like a snake, but the idea of, so problems with intersectionality are not so much with intersectionality as they are with people using intersectionality or how they're viewing intersectionality. So the exact reason we have intersectionality, or why that analysis is so powerful, so being able to acknowledge different knowledge, different identity, different politics, is the exact reasons why intersectionality is seen as limited. May very much talks about how when intersectionality is about focused on the feminist, coming from a feminist analysis or a gender first analysis, that not only is that limiting, but it also continues to support the interlocking systems of oppression. And she talks about when we were looking at gender first, um, that that's actually supporting dominance. Sorry, I've got my book here and all the highlights. Um, and so that gender from the beginning is biased towards dominance. So if we're only looking at that, then we're maintaining invisibility, which maintains other systems of oppression like racism and homophobia and classism, etc., and so on. Um, so it's a little like a hamster on a hamster wheel. And so one of the critiques being that she sort of picks up on is this idea that intersectionality is old hat. It's recycled, it's there's nothing new, it's repetition. And she was able to go, okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, what if we asked why is this needing to be repeated over and over and over? What aren't people getting from the beginning? What's like wait a minute, maybe it's not the repetition that's the problem. Maybe it's why does it need to be continued to be repeated, and that looking at that as a problem. So again, very much had me think of the movie Inception, as you can see with this image, a city upon a city, and kind of folding in and of itself, and that the critiques also provide us with information about the powers at work. And so those are kind of some of the notes that I just went over. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the race to innocence. And don't mind the movie theme. So Fellows and Razak talk about the race to innocence. And so if you can tell, I'm a very visual learner, and or so this idea of scrambling on top of each other, regardless of the well-being of people underneath, just to be the ones to reach the top first or foremost. And this is what race to innocence feels like. So, and again, we're getting this idea of visibility versus invisibility, and that the dominant culture takes up so much space that everybody else is on the perimeter. But it's so important. People are hanging on to the perimeter, or sorry, subordinate groups are hanging on to the perimeter with their dear life, which means that it's so important for them to become visible, for them to be, I'm here, I have a piece of the pie or a piece of this outside kind of rim. I kind of think about the old commercials, like with for dish soap, where they have a container of water and oil, and they put the dish soap in and all the oil goes to the edges. That's, I feel like the dominance is the dominant group is in the center, the dominant power is in the center, is the soap, and I'm no way suggesting dirty or clean, but just this idea of pushing everybody else out to the very edges. And so those edges are so precarious that being able to be visible means being well, I've written here, right? It's the natural defense is to deny that that people are or subordinate groups are oppressing others, and also kind of very much clearly saying this is my oppression, or the oppression I face is more pressing, more important than other forms of oppression. Um, that this is so important, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But if I have to muffle someone else for you to pay attention, I'm going to. And so very much Fellows and Razak take a look at how this is twofold. One is not actually effective because all intersectionality needs to be the systems of power need to be addressed simultaneously. And so not only does active participation in oppression reinforce the dominant systems, but it also leaves them unchallenged. So it's a complete no-win. Again, kind of like that hamster and a hamster working really, really, really hard, but not actually going anywhere when it is taken on a single identity access or one system of oppression. And so Fellows and Razak use respectability and use this concept of respectability to demonstrate how dominance is created and then reinforced. And then once they've established that, they take respectability and use it to look at the multiple interlocking systems involving sex trade work. Now, they use the word prostitution, and I have a hard time with that word. I understand that they're looking at sex trade work from a violence. An act of violence as well as a job or a form of employment. And so I can see if they're talking about how it is sexual violence, to call it sex trade work doesn't fit. However, I gotta tell you, like, ooh, I don't know if anyone else got cringy at that point, but yeah, oh, yeah. So I've used sex trade work in my presentation, and so this such a strong message around fighting for respectability, which is the tool of dominance, is pointless because respectability is the tool of dominance. Therefore, if you attempt to get it, once you get it, then whatever you're doing, like prostitution, if a prostitution ever became, or sex trade work ever became a respectful activity, then it wouldn't be sex trade work. And so it cannot be made into a respectable activity. And that, so yes, if an activity or if a group becomes respectable, then they become part of the dominant group, therefore oppressing other people and other subordinate groups. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like we could talk so much about that, and I'm very curious to people's reactions and people's what people kind of took from these articles. So the next one is considerations on mainstreaming intersectionality. And this is about taking intersectionality out of just an analysis and bringing it into a research paradigm. And Damoun makes five considerations for actually adopting and then mainstreaming intersectionality as a research paradigm. And I'm not going to get into sort of those details because I kind of like to take a look at the broader themes. Excuse me. So in this picture, this is Pink Floyd's one of Pink Floyd's covers for album covers, and so you can see the single prism, the single ray of light going through a prism and coming out a rainbow. And so I see that intersectionality, when it's used as an approach or analysis on one level, does so much, but as a research paradigm brings it to a whole other form or a whole other level. It creates a completely different well, I think her models of intersectional type analysis and being able to being able to actually deepen the research, but it gets tricky. Anyway, so part of the reason it gets tricky is this idea of matrix of meaning making. And I really liked the graphics or the pictures. I really liked the pictures in the article. Uh, uh, I thought that she made an extremely strong point how identity is very relative and relational. So that if we were to kind of like that prism, okay, so it's not that clear cut. It actually is a lot more like this, where depending on the context will depend on whether someone, an individual or a group is dominant or subordinate, and you can't just stack it up against each other. And so, if we could take this visual right here and make it into an amoeba, if you can imagine that, that to me represents the matrix of meaning making. And so it's complicated, and it's complicated because it's complicated, and any attempt to sort of make it simple ends up in these 2D limited uh, limits of being able to critique power, um, and it's just not that simple. It's not that simple. So intersectionality is limited in its power to disrupt systems when it's maintained on the individual level. And so Damoon is saying, let's expand it, let's make it bigger, let's put it into this idea of um, how we do research, how we look at research. So it raises the questions about power and knowledge, um, and so yeah. Mm. So when intersectionality is applied to systems and process, the focus is shifted from the other identity to how those identities are created. Um, and so using intersectionality as a research paradigm, and this is a quote from page 240, reveals knowledge about what and not just who is taken as given or normalized. And so being able to use it to apply to systems and process means that we're able to uncover a whole other dynamic of power of how it operates, its effect, and possible actual transformation. Yeah. Okay. So some of the themes that I felt ran throughout the articles was the idea of using intersectionality on a much broader level, um, on a really big level, beyond just the individual, beyond just looking at individual groups or individual people and their multiple levels of privilege or disadvantage. Um, and so again, this Damoon very much talks about the interlocking system of oppression that have to work together, as so does everybody, right? Like how we kind of in the growth of intersectionality, it got stuck or stunted or paused or hit a plateau, where people kind of were in silos of fighting racism, fighting sexism, fighting homophobia, fighting classism, where these articles suggest that again um, the original intent for intersectionality was that the systems of oppression all need to be addressed. It all needs to happen simultaneously. And so there are themes of that they continue to create and reinforce each other, that there's no simple, easy, or single line of identity, that all identity is relational. And then what I feel like I could talk to forever about is that identity is created from not what is not dominant. So the idea of we don't talk about that white person or that we don't use language to identify the dominant group, and so identity is actually what is not dominant. So the idea of marked versus unmarked, visibility versus invisibility. And so um, I totally realized I did not check this one slide over. Anyway, that's all right. So invisibility leads to efforts that can create more oppression. So feeling invisible then creates this push to be visible, but in that being visible is trying to be part of the dominant group, which then is actually taking on the dominant group's uh, not ability, but oppressing other groups. So yes, it all makes sense in my head. Bear with me. So when we continue to focus on the marked subordinate group, the dominant group continues to stay unmarked and in power. So there's really this idea of like, there are times where visibility is about creating the other, and invisibility is that power. And at the same time, when we're talking about being on the edges, subordinate groups being on the edges, or those with less power being on the edges, that the fight for visibility is so important, and so that is the driving force. So again, intersectionality can only challenge any system of oppression when all systems of oppression are challenged simultaneously. Is kind of like really what we need to shift in our thinking as social workers, that kind of concurrently, right? It all has to be worked in together. It can't just be one piece. And so we'll address sexism, and then we'll address racism, and then we'll address classism. That we have to find methods and strategies that address all of it at the same time. And so that is a completely different way of thinking of intersectionality, at least for me. My time, let's see. So substance use disorder and intersectionality. So working with, so that's working with people who use substances, harm reduction, substance use disorders, etc., and so on. This is kind of, I wanted to be able to apply it to the work that I do. So I have a couple of slides on this for us to kind of ponder and think about. So one of the things that struck me is that populations that are stereotyped as quote unquote addicts. So if you were to ask someone from the general population, what do they think an addict looks like? People have an image. They have an image of what that looks like. And often it's people who are homeless, people of color, people living in poverty, people living in low-income housing. And so that's sort of become our image of as a society about what someone with an addiction or a substance use disorder looks like. And yet, in my experience, the majority of people in the outpatient substance use treatment that I work in here in Ottawa, so again, keep all that in mind, is white, heterosexual, middle to upper class men. And so I get kind of drawing from that visibility, invisibility. So I think that the dominant group has a lot of flexibility of being visible and sort of accepted. As I said earlier, that identity actually comes from not being in the dominant group. And so just so visible that it's invisible. And at the same time, the invisibility of like, okay, well, white, heterosexual, middle to upper class men are not the picture of what quote unquote addicts are. Addicts are. And so I just wanted to kind of like have those two pieces in there and kind of like ask you, what do you think's up with that? What systems of oppression are working with that or involved in that? And so, yeah, so a couple of points to ponder. How did people who are homeless, people of color, people living in poverty become marked and represent substance use disorders? How does invisibility and visibility play out here? Also, what are the interlocking systems at play here? How do these systems reinforce each other? And lastly, for people who are not white, heterosexual, middle to upper class men who have substance use disorders, what larger systems may be at play if they are not attending treatment? intersectionality and substance use disorder, I also found this article on a study done discrimination in substance use disorders among Latinos, the role of gender nativity and ethnicity. So this is a study that was done in the U.S., and a couple of the main points were that so the Latino population in the United States um, faces a high level of discrimination, and so through their research, they associated substance use was among a common coping strategy to the discrimination experienced by Latino men. They identified that discrimination alone, regardless of substance use, discrimination alone contributes to underemployment, lower wages, limited access to health care, and other resources that can affect health outcomes, though they didn't specify what. And so this idea of like discrimination causing substance use and also conditions that may also create substance use, and that substance use and substance use disorders would also contribute to underemployment, lower wages. Yes. So, you know what? The kind of term that comes to mind is this idea of what came first, the chicken or the egg. But no, no, no. The discrimination came first. And so substance use is always, or substance use disorders are, in my experience, always a form of coping, self-soothing that has occurred over a long period of time until there is changes in the system, in the physical, biological system. But that, yeah, it's a lot of using substances as a very effective coping skill at the beginning, and less so over time. So again, though, bringing in a couple of the other systems is Latino women were reported to less likely to use substances because of discrimination and more likely to use their support networks. However, so though discrimination was high on the factors that led Latino men to use substances, trauma, specifically in abuse history, was more a predictor of substance use disorders among Latino women. And then the other, right, all the interlocking systems, is that foreign-born Latinos were less likely to experience substance use disorders than American-born populations of Latino men and women. And so, yes, I thought that this article, and I didn't add it. I'll add it to when I submit this, the resources. So if you want to take a look at that, yeah. So one of the last slides, I found this, and again, so World War Z was the picture when I was talking about the race to innocence. So you see hordes of bodies climbing and rolling over each other. It's like Black Friday at the mall. And again, like thinking about what that's like in the States and all the people trampling each other to buy stuff, and like what brings people out to the point that they're trampling other people for, really cheap products. So thinking about poverty, thinking about limited income, thinking about all these other pieces. And in the end, capitalism is alive and well and continues to be reinforced. Kind of like the Walmart of creating a system of poverty among employment to serve people who are living in poverty, right? And that people in poverty are continuing to buy at Walmart because it is more affordable, yet they are contributing to Walmart being successful in creating poverty among their employees. Anyway, that's a rant for another time. So the discussion questions that have already been posted, they're a little bit bigger than the ones that are in this presentation. So feel free to kind of pick ones that more draw to you. The ones in the presentation are more specific. But if you've already kind of been pondering all of these in the last 24 hours, then by all means, run with it. So that's all I got. So again, yeah, intersectionality, very cool articles, and I got a lot out of it. I hope you did too. I look forward to yeah, continuing the discussion, because I feel like this is just my blip to all the different kind of things that can be taken from these articles. Okay, thanks so much, folks.